Welcome everyone. My name's Tony Peacock. I'm the from the Cooperative Research Centres Association. So we run this early career researcher showcase every year. I think this is the at least the 20th year now that we've run it, but it's been quite some time. We predate 3-minute thesis and things like that by quite a few years. As it turns out, we've been asking people to describe their thesis in 3 minutes for some time. So we did actually. It used to be a 10-minute competition with 3 minutes as well. So there were two categories. And a number of years ago, we consolidated this competition and asked people to enter via a 30-second YouTube video. And the reason we did that was when it was a written application for an entry to a speaking competition, we couldn't tell whether you were very good at speaking through a written application, and it took us a lot longer to assess a written application. And so we went to 30-second video as your entry. And I do want to make the point that the 30-second video is an entry to a speaking competition. So we don't put a lot of store by the production value. We don't encourage you to go and spend a week or two filming it or anything like that. It's nice if we can hear you on the video and the wind noise isn't too much. But from time to time in this competition, we've had people do incredible graphics and incredible like Lego things growing up into giving us the message. But please remember, this isn't a video competition. It isn't explaining your science through your video. So we do want to see you because we're judging whether you should be shortlisted to come to the competition which will be held at the Hilton in Adelaide on this Tuesday, the 28th of May. So you need to be available that date. Don't enter the competition if you're out of the country that day. And we invite 5 finalists to the competition where they're given 5 minutes in front of our audience. Our audience are senior people in science and innovation. So they CEOs and senior members of cooperative research centres, but they're also from business companies participating in CRCs, senior academics and university managers. There are about 200 to 300 people in the audience, and it's that audience that then votes on the winners. It's a very ancient method of paper voting. We just give them a sheet of paper with the 5 names on it and they tick the one they think did the best job on the day. And then at the gala dinner for our event the following night, we make a presentation to the winner. Just to finalise those criteria, all 5 finalists win a $1,000 cash prize, and they get the trip we pay for you to come to our conference. We register you for the whole conference. We want you to be there for the whole conference because it's about collaboration and innovation. You get a lot out of it, as well as making a contribution to it. We put you up at the Hilton there for those times. We provide a little bit of coaching for you, which you can take notice of or not, and we do that through Dr. Will Grant, who's a senior lecturer.
That'll do.
That'll do. Senior lecturer at the ANU's Centre for the Public Awareness of Science, and will talk to us for a while. Then we're going to invite you to ask questions, but there's an awful lot of people there. You can ask either through the chat line there, or you'll need to take yourselves off mute later as we invite questions from you. You must be from a member organisation of our association, which is the CRC Association. And that's all of Australia's CRCs, minus one. If you're not the Antarctic CRC, sorry, you're not eligible this year.
What?
Well, they're not a member, so...
fair enough.
And about 20 of Australia's 40 universities, so you need to check there. And we do limit to 10 entries from each participant. So that's usually not going to be a problem from a CRC. They usually don't, you know, they often have a maximum of about 5 entries. If you're coming from one of our universities, you will need to check with the head of department, and we may need to coordinate. But the answer to that is to get in quick and be, generally the universities just take the first 10 that want to enter. Its entry is now open, and we encourage you to go for it. It closes on Friday, the 8th of March. Traditionally, about 90% of applications come in on the last day, so you don't get a lot of chance usually to see other people's videos there. But anyway, we look forward to it. The other point I'll make is that our prize money is just for you to do whatever the heck you want to do with it. It's not required that you go on a study tour or anything like that. You use it how you like. So I remember one a few years ago, after she was presented with the $5,000, said she was handing in her PhD in 6 months' time, getting married 2 days later. I certainly couldn't have predicted the finish of my PhD that closely. And the money would enable them to go on a honeymoon, which they couldn't have afforded until then. So we're delighted when that happens. An Italian student won it a few years ago. He's now a senior lecturer at the University of Queensland. He said to me after we took him out for drinks the night he won it that, gee, $6,000 is a big amount of money for him, and it is about as much as required to get his visa turned into permanent residency to pay for all the paperwork associated with that. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. I can go on radio and say, that's what you're doing with it. And he said, no, I'm buying a motorbike. So the choice at Ducati, he was quite specific about the make of motorbike, actually. So the choice is up to you. I think that's enough from me. We'll hand over to Dr. Will Grant to speak for a while on what makes excellent communication, which is the whole point of this exercise, is that we're encouraging people not only to do fantastic science, but to be able to talk about it. Over to you.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you very much, Tony. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me this morning. What I'm going to do is I'll introduce a little bit about me and our centre and what we do. Then I'm going to go through some of the tips that I would recommend when you think about building your 30-second video. But I hope that there'll be tips that you can use in all of your science communication work. I hope that it's not just going to change what you do for this video, but that you might use them when you're talking about your research to other people in your lab, to your supervisors, to people outside of your lab, to politicians, to your friends and family, or anything like that. So I hope that the stuff that I talk about today can get a teaser for thinking about how you think about communicating your science. As we go, I can see the chat window just there. Dive in with any, just there, I guess, actually. I don't know. Dive in with any questions as we go. I'll try and answer them. I'm happy to be thrown any red herrings, but at the end, I'll also have time for more questions as well. So don't feel like you have to hold back. Now, just as Tony said, I'm Will Grant. I'm from the Centre for Public Awareness of Science at ANU. So our job is to understand, research and understand the relationship between science and society, to understand where it goes well, where it doesn't go well, what happens, what doesn't happen, but then also to use that research to help Australian scientists, scientists around the world, to then communicate their research with other stakeholders and other people that they can connect with. We do this in a variety of different ways. So we have undergraduate programs, postgraduate programs in science communication. We have a PhD program as well. But we also do workshops going around Australia, teaching various scientists what they can do to change their science communication practices. Now, obviously, as I said before, we have a master's program, so you can spend years learning how to become really top flight in communicating your science, to become the people that go out there onto TV and radio or newspapers or other places communicating their work. But we also want other people not to become paid science communicators, David Attenborough or Brian Cox or anything like that. We also want Australia's scientists who their day job is working with data, working in the lab, doing that kind of stuff, to become just that bit better at being able to explain what their science is. We want very much everyone to have a few more skills. Now, that means that what we hope to do in any workshop that we do is not give people a silver bullet, turn people into, as I said before, David Attenborough in half an hour or a day or anything like that, but put people on a journey so that next time you're doing things, you're communicating your work, you'll do it a little bit better. And the thing I love about working with scientists is that you're all data collectors, you're all experimentalists. So I hope that what you could do after today is to be a little bit experimental with your science communication. And by that, I mean, not just do whatever you want, but to do different things and to document, to think about the results. We should all go out next time you're talking to someone, think, did that work? Were they interested in what I was saying, or were they not interested in what I was saying? And if they were interested, you should do more of that and less of the other one. So this is the place I wanted to start. And this is something I want to challenge all of you to think about, is thinking about the family barbecue. You have friends over, you have family over, or you're at your friend's place for a barbecue. We've all been there. And your uncle or your cousin or your mother comes over to you and says to you that question that I know a lot of PhD students might dread. And that question is so what are you working on? Now, I'd like you to just think a little bit here about your emotions at this time. Do you instantly panic and think, it's too complicated to explain what I'm working on? Do you instead explain too much? And you might go into far too much detail. What is their reaction every time when you explain what you're working on? Now, I've seen in the past different sorts of reactions. One, their eyes glaze over and they regret asking you that question pretty quickly. Tony, have you ever had this experience?
Oh, no, everyone's always been interested with me, but I've seen it happen to other people.
Fair enough. But look, there are always times when maybe it doesn't work very well and people's eyes glaze over it. They regret asking and they try and leave the conversation as quickly as possible. What I want is for everyone to try to get to a place where the other reaction happens. People are excited. People are keen to know more. You tell them a little bit about what you're working on. They say, that's great. Oh, you're helping to solve these problems. You're doing these kinds of things. The reason I think it's worth starting with a family barbecue is that so often when we talk about our science, we're talking in the lab. We're talking with our peers, our supervisors, the people working around us who have the same knowledge as us. They understand the same things, they have the same jargon as us, and they talk in the same ways. But our friends and family, they don't. So the first thing that I think is absolutely crucial when we're thinking about any form of communicating your science, and this applies for the 30-second video, is to think about who you are communicating with. Number one rule of any science communication is know your audience. Now, many of us make the mistake of talking in the same language with an outside audience, friends, family, or as Tony said before, senior science and innovation people, as if they're the same people as in our lab. That means we think they understand the same concepts, we think they understand the same words, and we think that the same metaphors will apply to them. Now, most of you, I'll assume, have pretty smart friends and family. And I'd assume, Tony, as well, the people judging these competitions, the senior science and innovation people, will be very smart. So it's not their lack of brain power. What it means, though, is that they probably don't understand the same jargon and the same complex terms that you might work with. So, Tony, can I just ask, a couple of the senior science and innovation people that are judging this, they probably have PhDs, they probably have high-level knowledge?
Oh yeah, I imagine there'd be at least 50% of the people in the room would have a PhD.
Yeah.
But there'll be specialists in their own areas, obviously.
Specialists in their own areas. So that's one of the first things, that even though people may be very smart, and I think we should always assume our audience is very intelligent, but that they don't specifically know the jargon that we work with. So one of the first things I would say is, when you're communicating your work, you need to strip out the words that only make sense in your world, only make sense to the people that you're working with. So if you are writing a 30-second script to communicate your work, you could go and talk to friends, family members who are outside, and just look at the words. I mean, it'll only be 100 words or something like that, and find the bits of jargon, the complicated words that you don't know, and ask them, do you understand this word or not? So first rule is thinking about the words that they don't know. When in doubt, we always recommend to try and get your writing to the level that a smart 12-year-old would understand. Same with your speaking. A smart person, but not knowing all of the specific words as possible. The second thing, you can also then build on this by thinking about the language that you use and the metaphors that you use. As much as possible, use them from their world, not from your world. And by that, I mean, you're always going to be in a stronger place when you are using metaphors and ideas and similes from the natural world, or things that everybody shares. So instead of talking about, it's like that time when you use that sort of microscope or some piece of scientific equipment, you might explain it in terms like the weather or something like that. Now, audience is the number one thing that I would say you need to think about when you're communicating your science. So in this 30-second video, you're talking to senior science and innovation people who do understand the role of science, what science does, and they will understand an awful lot about a lot of different sciences, but they won't necessarily understand the jargon and the details of your specific field. So first rule is getting away from that and finding more plain English ways to explain it. The second rule that I would really stress is understanding your goal. And this should apply for both the 30-second video or for any other form of science communication. The 30-second goal, yes, okay, is to win the $5,000 and get the motorbike. But actually, we should always think, what's your goal when you're explaining your work? Now, this might be, imagine the barbecue that I talked about previously. What's the goal of talking to your uncle about what your research is? Is the goal to make him know every piece about your research? I doubt that. Is the goal to make him excited about your work and feel like you're contributing to society and you're not wasting your time? That sounds like a pretty good goal. Similarly, we often work with scientists talking to politicians. Is the goal of getting that politician to understand everything about your work? No, probably not. Is it to get them to look at a piece of data? It might be. Or you might have another goal with a politician. Maybe you can be the friendly scientist that always talks to them in a nice way. Maybe your goal is at a different stage. Your goal might be just to convince them that you are a trustworthy person. Now, for the 30-second video, that might not be it. But I do think you should always think, when you're in a science communication context, think about what you want them to come out the other end with. Do you want them to change their knowledge, or change their attitude, or potentially change their behavior? In this 30-second video, you want them to change a little bit of knowledge, but probably the attitude to what you're talking about. So always try and define what your goal is. Now, once you've got your goal, what is your goal in terms of your research? Do you want to communicate the problem? Or do you want to communicate the results that you've found? I'd suggest, most people, and this obviously if you're at the beginning of your PhD, you'll have to focus on the problem because you don't have results yet. If you're at the end of the PhD, you can choose to have results, but you can never really communicate results without specifying the problem first. So the thing that you should always try and think about is, why is my research important to these other people? Why is my research important to the senior science and innovation people out there? Why is my research important to politicians? Why is my research important to Uncle Bob at the barbecue? There's a trick to this though. Understanding why your research is important can be kind of hard. Tony, how do you decide what research is important?
It relates to the goal. So if it's going to make a lot of money and that's the goal, but
Yep.
usually, is it going to make a difference? Someone, you know, what's it going to change? So I've worked in agriculture but also innovation research, but also straight out environmental research. So I'm interested in extinctions and stopping extinctions. So it relates to what you're trying to do, I think.
Yeah. I think that's really great. What you're trying to do, where you're trying to make a difference. Now, one thing I was thinking when Tony was talking is that your research doesn't have to be the whole piece of solving climate change, stopping extinctions, making billions of dollars for the Australian economy. But you should couch your research in those goals to say, if we want to stop climate change, then one thing we need to do is this. Now, your research, as all research is, may be a small piece of a much larger machine. But still, you should specify what the overall machine is. Why my research is important is because we need to do this to get to there. I often think one other way we can think about why it's important is to think about your own emotions. Why is it important to you? Why are you doing this? Why do you get up every morning to go into the lab to look for more data? Now, if you can grab onto that emotion, then you're probably going to find a much better way to tell a story. You often hear about people who say, well, my grandmother actually suffers from this disease, and I know that I won't actually be able to cure it for her but I do want to stop other people from suffering this. And that's a great emotional locus to grab onto. So there's a lot of reasons why research is important. You can always specify the big picture, but you can also go to your own heart. You know, why is it important to you is a really important thing. Now, the final thing that I want to leave on, once we've thought through the audience that you're talking with and the goals that you've got, the final bit that I want to point to is a useful way to structure any form of science communication. Now, this is a form that we've borrowed from a good friend of ours, Randy Olson. Don't Be Such a Scientist. Well worth a read, this book. He's an American science communicator. He was a scientist for 20 years in Harvard, a marine biologist, and then he dropped out and went to Hollywood and wanted to be a scriptwriter. And he wrote some films, and he's been doing that for a while. But after a while, he realized that the lessons of Hollywood and script writing can be useful for the world of scientists and communicating their work. Now, his books are all worth a read. I'd suggest you can get a lot from them. But there's one lesson in particular that I want to give you, and it's a 3-word slogan. So a little bit Tony Abbott-ish of me, a little bit Tony Abbott-ish of Randy, but it's something that hopefully can stick in your head and hopefully you can use in your 30-second video or in any other form of science communication. And it's a structure. It's basically the structure of a story. So the 3-word slogan that Randy has given is and, but, therefore. This is the structure of a story. So any story that you remember, a film that you've seen or a novel or anything like that, uses this structure. So for example, I always ask people when I do a workshop, can anyone remember the plot of The Lord of the Rings? Now, the movies actually came out nearly 20 years ago, but people can still give me a rough idea of the plot because the story is stuck in their head. They may have seen them 20 years ago, read the books before that, but the story stays in their head because it's an and, but, therefore. So I'll give it to you. In Lord of the Rings, Frodo likes the Shire and he lives there, and that's when all his family is. This is the background section. But there's a problem. You know, in the Lord of the Rings, it's a magic ring that is going to cause a lot of problems and it must be destroyed. Therefore, Frodo is going to journey across the world and destroy the ring. The structure there of a story, and but therefore, can be applied to your research as well. Typically, we already do it. In our literature reviews, we say, we already know this, we already know that, and we already know this other thing, but we don't know this. But there's a problem with how this stacks together, or but there's a problem with applying this in the real world. I'd suggest when you're thinking about your 30-second video, if you can pull the structure down to an and, but, therefore, you'll probably be quite successful. So you might, for example, say 10 seconds. We know that this disease is debilitating. Lots of people are suffering from it. But one thing that we don't know is this, or one problem that we haven't solved yet is this. Therefore, that's where I come in. Often you find that the instant you start looking at writing your work, we often make a list. You know, we often put down bullet points of these are the things that I've done, these are things that I know. If you can just put the word but in there, or however, something like that, it starts to give it a story structure that will make it much more easy for people to listen to. If you get to this, if you're writing and you're thinking about, okay, why is the work important? Why is it important to me? Well, okay, it's important to me because I care about this problem or I want to solve this thing. Put it into that structure, and, but, therefore. Use language that is as much as possible from the everyday world. Then you're likely to get something that is going to be more compelling. Now, what I'd suggest is once you've done this, practice your 30-second video. Practice it talking to someone else. Practice it talking to people outside of your lab. Say, hey, what do you reckon about this? Is this convincing? It's never going to be perfect, but it doesn't matter. What you've got in a structure like that and getting to those sorts of points is the main thing. So, Tony.
Thank you very much. There's a couple of points I'll just raise, and I'm now invite anyone that wants to ask a question. Now, you can either just put it into the chat or you can raise your hand and you take yourself off mute and we'll have you ask Will or myself, or just raise a point when you feel to go ahead. One of the things we've found with the videos in the past is we have actually knocked out people for going overtime. So when we ask for 30 seconds, we mean 30 seconds because 33 means you've had 10% extra to your competitors. Now, we're not so pedantic that if you submit a 33-second video and you don't actually start for a second or two, you don't worry about too much about the editing. But if you speak for 33 or 36 seconds, as some people have done in the past, and they've done, it's fine if you do a terrible job and then you're not going to be shortlisted anyway. Our problem is where you've done a terrific job and we want to shortlist you, but you've taken extra time.
Problem is they're all going to do a terrific job now, Tony.
Yeah, I mean, this is hard stuff. Don't just be aware you'll be the best speakers at our conference. Young early career scientists speak much better by and large than my generation now. So you don't hesitate to enter. The next point I'd make is that also don't worry if English is your second language. So you do need to enter in English. But we've had at least one person whose English was his third language, and we've had, I think, 2 other winners where English was their second language. And then just finally, I should have acknowledged right at the start that none of this is possible without sponsorship, because obviously this is an expensive exercise for us to put on, and Central Queensland University are the sponsors of this competition for us. So we're really grateful to CQU CQ University, who have been very generous. Right, any questions of Will?
I've got a question, Tony. It's Jordan and Will. Thanks for that, Will. I really like the and, but, and therefore structure, but how much emphasis do you put on the and, the but, and therefore? So with our applications, I think Tony and I will both agree that a lot of people seem to put a lot of emphasis on the and rather than the therefore and the actual what they're going to do or what the outcomes are.
My suggestion, as much as possible, is you emphasize the but. That's the most important bit. You haven't got a story if you haven't got the but. Now, there may be times when you don't actually have a therefore. Your therefore might be short, as in, this is what I'm going to do. Usually when you're at the start of your PhD, you don't have any results, you don't have anything. So therefore might be, I'm going to work on it. Later on in a PhD, you might have, therefore, I've found out all of these awesome things. So therefore might be important. But I would say you minimize the and. You want to get people in the right place. You want to say climate change is a huge problem, or cancer is all of these kinds of things. The but is where your story starts, and that's where you should really work on emphasizing. Limit the number of ands and increase the number of but, or increase the strength of the but.
Could I just add to the and, but, therefore, which I really like? I was in a management-y type course recently, and the pitch there was, think about saying in exactly the same way, you know how, and asking that question, and then following it up with, well, we think that if we do this action or whatever, then we will achieve this. So you know how traffic's really busy at peak hour? Well, we think if we can manipulate the traffic lights, then we can ease travel time for everyone. So that same sort of path. So I think that's a really great message, Will.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'd agree with that, definitely.
Okay, there's two questions. Sorry?
I was just saying exactly what you're doing.
Yep, there's two questions in the chat there. From David Bruce at the Bushfire and Natural Hazards CRC has asked that PhDs, and he's asked this of you, Will, so what special message can you give to get the message across for people whose first language is not English?
Yep, I think, of course, I am advising people as much as possible to use plain English. And that's an interesting one for people with English as a second language, because often we find people with English as a second language might learn the jargon more easily because you're coming over here and doing doing a PhD and working precisely on that. What I would suggest is same rules apply. As much as possible, find someone that you can talk it through beforehand. Try and talk in still the language that you would find in a newspaper, or the language that you would find at a barbecue. There isn't a silver bullet for fixing that sort of issue. I would say as much as possible, you have to make it natural to yourself. You really want to communicate from your own emotion. Use words that are short and simple. That would be the goal.
And when you do practice in front of somebody else, it's very useful sometimes that somebody else is not from your lab.
100%.
Because they speak that same language. In the CRCs, we often refer to the Mrs. Peacock test. If I can explain it to Ros at home, my wife, who's not technically trained.
So the one thing I would just say to that,
she's also extremely honest and will tell you if you've got it wrong. So you need to find somebody who can, critique you in such a way that is really honest and straightforward.
I'd just add to that, you probably need to find someone who either is a native English speaker or has comes from a different language group, just to make sure that you they'll say, okay, you need to slow down here or speed up or whatever it is.
And I would say that applies to everyone in here, is that many people try to put too much information in their 30 seconds. And they rush. And of course, if you're rushing and you've got a strong accent or you struggle with the language, it becomes harder for the judges to understand. But it applies to everyone. If you're rushing too much, go back and take some words out of your script.
Just on that, Tony, I think there's a useful lesson from the world of script writing that Randy Olson uses, that we may often find in our results of a PhD, there's quite a lot of interesting things. You know, I found that this could help with this group of people, or this could solve that problem, this can do this, there's a key point in script writing, they call it the power of one, not from the book, but meaning just one thing. Pick the one important thing to tell. What is the most important thing about your PhD? The most important problem that you're working on, the most important result, the most important reason, and focus on that. You only have 30 seconds. You know, the dream scenario of any talk like this is people are intrigued and they say, oh, does that also apply here? And you say, yes, I've actually got a whole section in my thesis that talks about that. But you can't cover everything. You certainly can't cover everything in 30 seconds. So pick the most important and just focus on that.
Okay. We'll keep moving down the list. Avantio says, I'm at the end of my PhD and currently the results have been adapted for real world applications. Is it okay if I share a bit on the application of the research? Absolutely. Or is my story strictly telling the research part? No. So because the cooperative research centres are all about applied research, our audience is very interested in application of research. And particularly when you're talking to a non-specialist, you know, intelligent but not specialist audience, the actual impact is one of the really interesting things for them. We hear from even right through to the interviews for CRCs where people might be asking the government for $50 or $60 million. We get feedback from the research, from that committee that assesses that people have focused far too much, 80% on the problem and 20% on the solution, where they want to invest in the solutions. If you have some results, you're at an advantage to somebody who's just starting out, I think. And I would show them off there. I should say that the judges, and there are four or five judges, Will and I both been judges in this, but there are about 2 or 3 other people, and we just give you a score out of 10. And it depends on the judge. If some judges are really, really impressed by results, others really impressed by your speaking. But we're looking for those sort of 3 areas that we do want to know the implications of your research in there, and we're not particularly interested in you know, the process of you doing the research. That's usually of less interest. We do get some applications where people are just telling us about how they do the research, and that often is just that's very specialist knowledge. How do you show where your research stands out in a crowded field? Lots of translational research, so how do I show a difference, asks Ideala. What do you reckon, Will?
I think that's an interesting thing because your field may be crowded to you internally. That doesn't mean we need to know that it's crowded. I think, sure, there's a lot of crowded fields, but I would say there's a lot of people working on climate change. There's a lot of people working on cancer, whatever it is. We accept that. Tell us your story. Don't go and focus on the negatives of, oh, there's a lot of other people working on this and they're doing great work too. Don't tell us that. Focus on the positives of your story. I have this thing. There is this problem. I'm going to fix this.
Joanne's asked if it's possible to view the entries from previous winners, and Jordan's already responded to that and given you the link. There, it isn't the easiest one to find there, but that link's there. But if you're just following through, it's in our annual conference and showcasing early career researchers. One of the things, if you see last year's finalists, the winner uses a prop, and he's a native Chinese. He's not an English speaker as his first language, and he uses a very simple prop in his video. And he's actually at a train station, so he does use some techniques there. And as I said, you don't need to go to any great trouble. It wouldn't have taken them much to film that. But it did help his entry quite a lot, I think, in explaining and getting him over the line. And then he, at the presentation, you can use PowerPoint slides or slides. We don't encourage very many. I think we give you a limit of 5 or so in your 5 minutes. I just might get that, get Jordan to check that. And you can present in any way you want. You can bring a prop or two if you wish to, but it's a speaking competition once you're there. Speaker presence, yes. Is it assessed or is it mainly in the message? Yeah, you have to be a good speaker at the end of the day, but just being a good speaker is not going to be enough to get you over the line here. It's obviously better if you can present your message well, but I don't want to discourage people from doing that. It's about science communication and the importance of getting your message across. If you're just selling snake oil and you're a great speaker, but you haven't actually seen too much. So I don't. It is possible. We did put up all the applications at one stage there, and many of them are on YouTube still, although I think on our website we only have the shortlisted ones. And you will notice when you see the great loads of them that there are some people who are superb speakers, but they don't say very much. And being in Canberra, Will and I are very familiar with that. You mentioned about thinking about who your audience is. What if your topic is highly controversial, meaning there are those who may be highly supportive and highly against, such as climate change? How do you ensure they don't switch off to your story even before you begin?
I'll jump in on that one there, Tony. First thing I'd say, 30-second video, you can focus on a more narrow audience than, I don't think you need to worry about it too much. So as Tony said, these are senior science and innovation people. As long as you're reasonable, then you're not likely to have people switched off in your 30-second video. However, we do know that there's a lot of controversial scientific topics, and communicating across them does carry some difficulties. This is one of the things that we work with scientists quite a lot, is how do you cope with these controversial issues? I would suggest that when in doubt, keeping it at human levels, talking about your experience and what you know and what you've seen in the data, and staying with that is a good way to be. But also what you want to do is, as much as possible, be reasonable. I often think of people that communicate across controversial issues. Sometimes our goal may be to just have them trust us, not necessarily to change their mind, because changing their mind is a very hard thing to do. But maybe we should just think of them as okay, as long as they think I'm a reasonable person, then that's as much as I can get. The other thing we have to work out is, what's the benefit to communicating with people who are very, very different to me? Am I better off, and climate change is a great example, am I better off trying to convince some other people, some people who might be in the middle on this issue? Or, this is the thing I think, am I best off trying to convince young business students that the best way to make their $1 billion is by going out there and inventing clean energy and clean energy solutions and those kinds of things? Don't worry about the people that are very hostile to your particular topic all the time. Sure, they may be out there, but you can't always solve everything with every communication act.
One of the best talks I've seen was the colonel who's in charge of energy for the Department of Defense in the US, and he's having to talk to congressmen all the time, and he said, I don't try and argue on climate change. The fact is we can't fire weapons in California for as many days a year as we used to. And when we're refueling, we're at our most vulnerable. If you're refueling in the air or at sea or on land, transferring fuel into a plane or a tank, we're at our most vulnerable. So the least times we can do that, if we can save fuel, that's good for these other reasons. And then I don't have to argue with the far right of the Republican Party congressman or whatever on whether climate change exists or not, or whatever. He's finding another reason. How many words? Guti has asked. Usually we say 65 words is 30 seconds for many speakers.
Okay. Sorry, I thought you were going to give a words per minute. Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah. We work on 80 for a funeral, 120 for an enthusiastic speech, 100 for a normal speech.
And you can, there are, and John F. Kennedy was one of the fastest speakers on earth, and of course, I was recognised as one of the best orators. But you have to speak very crisply there. So I don't write that. It depends on you is a little bit the answer.
Yeah, these are sort of good rules of thumb. I think adding to that, it depends. If you can enunciate really clearly and get your tone really clear, then you can talk faster. And fast talking can convince people more, so long as they can get the thread of what you're saying. But slow down if you need to. So when you're writing this, think about, what did you say, 65, Tony, for 30 seconds? Sort of 100 to 120 words per minute is a useful place to be, mostly.
Nick's asked about heavily methods-focused research, insecticidal abilities of endophytes. Will, what's your reaction here?
Yeah, the thing I would say, Nick, straight away is, why are you doing it? And you are doing it for reasons, and maybe it's because there's a problem with our existing method. That's okay. Sure, most research is very methods focused. Don't focus on the details. What you need to do is focus on why have I been tasked to do this? Why am I doing this? Why is it important to someone? I'm sure, I don't know very much about the words you've got there, but I've seen insecticidal. That's important to a lot of people out there. Don't focus on the deep details. Focus on the reason that you are doing it. Now, that might be a reason because you've been told you have to do it, but focus on why you were told to do it and explain that story. Yes, there may be a bit of methods, but I'd be surprised. I'd push back and say I'd be surprised if you have to explain it in technical terms.
Karen, who manages our website and the judging of this competition, has reminded me that all entries are on the website, so you can look at the shortlisted ones and the non-shortlisted ones if you like to see what the judges are going for there. Will the story structures be able to apply to social science, asks John. Will?
Yes, absolutely. It applies to all forms of communication. A story is just it's just the most useful way for human brains to absorb information. It's just how our brains have been structured. There's writers out there who call us the storytelling animal. It's one of the things that we have done for 2 million years, maybe a bit more, and our brains are just primed to grab onto stories and put them in. That's why we can remember stories from childhood. Our brains are wired to grab stories. They work for all forms of information. So social science, sure, we have this problem here, but we don't know something more. I mean, I'm not even saying it in social science terms. It's completely agnostic to the type of information you have. The useful thing about academic research, whether social science, science, humanities, or anything like that, is that we work with problems. And problems are great for turning into stories because that's the essence of a story is a problem.
Paul has asked, can you allow yourself a bit of creative license and make sci-fi-ish statements? I'll jump in there. Absolutely. But if you're a Star Trek nerd, just be aware that not everyone is. I know that might be a surprise to you. So reference to certain traits of Spock or something like that can and will be lost on some of the audience. So I can't recall an example, but I find particularly where people are doing reference to a specific thing. This can even go through to there was one of the chairs in the CRC interviews last week. They were asking for a lot of money, and he used a reference. Do you remember this movie, which can be really good, but it needs to be a sort of pretty well-known movie, and he didn't. It was not. And I had no idea of the analogy he was using the other day, and he still chose to use it, but it meant he had to explain what it was a little bit more. So if you do, don't make them sort of too critical or too nuanced, if you like. If you see we get 30 to 50 entries a year of 30 seconds each, if the other judges are like me, they're doing it probably late at night at home and they're running through them, and they may not, sometimes you just don't get the reference. Is that all the questions?
I think that's the bottom of the list there.
All right. Nobody wants to come off mute and ask any further ones? That's great. Thank you to everyone for signing up. I really encourage you to apply. And I also, it's one of the competitions where I always write to all the students afterwards saying, this is really brave stuff and we're very grateful for you to have a go. And it really is a thing that is it's designed to take you out of your comfort zone. And don't be shy to do it. And it is a big deal to do a video and send it in to a bunch of strangers to judge you. And I hope that, winning up to $6,000 in a trip to our conference is enough to encourage you to do it. But it is a good exercise. Everyone gets something out of it at the end of the day, even though you will be horribly uncomfortable while you're doing it. But that's going to be a big chunk of your career. So the sooner you get good at it, the better.
I have a few things to add, Tony. Everyone, I'll be uploading this to YouTube and sharing the link with everyone, probably in the next hour or two. Also, and I believe, Will, you still offer your assistance to the shortlisted, don't you, to help them develop their 5-minute presentation?
Yep, I certainly do. So if anyone, once people have been shortlisted, so that's after the video stage, we have conversations about honing their later 5 or 10-minute talk. So very happy to do that. Just building on that, if anyone has other questions or inquiries about science communication, we are very happy to help with all of that. You can find out more about us at cpas.anu.edu.au.
Great. Thank you for all your thanks coming up there. We do appreciate it. And good luck to everyone with your applications. And by all means, get them in by the 8th of March. It'll be midnight that night, I imagine, is the closing time. And if you have any questions about whether you're eligible or whatever, just get on to Jordan or to me through the email, and we'll answer those for you. We want you to enter, and so we'll try and find some member you can enter through if you're uncertain of your own eligibility there. And it's 2 years before your PhD. I know that's actually pretty hard to judge. We leave it to you. We don't integrate that. We don't interrogate that terribly to 5 years after your PhD. And again, if it's a few months either way, we're reasonably relaxed about that. So we look forward to your entries, and we'll see you some of you in Adelaide in May.